They buried me at dusk where the swamp begins and the cotton ends. No hymn, no marker. Just mud, roots, and the sound of chains in my ears. I know because I watched it happen. Eyes open under the moss, breath thin as a thread. Before we go further, subscribe and comment your state below. If you're still here, you care about buried history. My name is Caleb. Thornhill Plantation called me property. Reading was my crime. The whip was my sentence. At dawn they said, "He's dead." By night the ground said otherwise. An old woman's vial cooled my heart to a slow tap. They laid me in a shallow hole at the swamp's edge. I woke with dirt in my mouth and blood in my teeth. I clawed sideways, found a rotting tunnel, and pulled myself through like a man reborn in mud and pain. The swamp took me in. Dark water, cold breath, eyes in the cypress. There I learned a different kind of gospel. How a whisper can be louder than a shout. How fear can burn hotter than fire. How a mask with hollow eyes can turn a man into a story. They thought I was gone. So I came back as what they feared most. A ghost with a memory. A name they tried to bury and a debt I intended to collect in full. Tell me, if the grave spat you out with vengeance in your lungs, would you go back? I came into this world on a floor made of packed dirt, not a bed. The midwife cut the cord with a rusted knife and wiped me with a rag that smelled of lye. Outside, cicadas screamed like tiny engines. Inside, my mother whispered my name, Caleb, like a prayer she wasn't allowed to say out loud. Morning on Thornhill began with a bell and ended with a whip. The bell said move. The whip said hurry. Cotton bolls tore skin like little knives. And the sun pressed down until every thought turned slow. We learned to save our words the way others saved coins. Small, careful, hidden. Master Richard Thornhill rode a bay horse that snapped at anyone who got close. He wore clean boots that never touched mud unless they stepped on someone. He liked numbers, acres, bales, bodies. He liked order, rows straight, heads low, eyes down. He used men like tools and broke them the same way. The overseer, Abel Jenkins, kept a counting voice. He counted strikes, steps, minutes late, ounces short. Property needs rules, he would say, as if the words were a coat he put on to feel bigger. We learned his rhythm the way we learned the weather. When his boots slowed, danger sped up. My earliest job was water boy. I carried a gourd from row to row and watched hands bleed into cotton like drops of sunset. My mother's hands were maps of scars. She showed me how to wrap fingers with old cloth and smile small enough to pass as nothing. See what others don't, she told me. Hear what others won't. Her eyes shone like wet bark in the shade. At night, the quarters hummed with low talk. We shared food, songs, and silent looks that said more than words. Sometimes a baby cried and the walls trembled with the effort to keep the sound soft enough. Sometimes the men stared at the door as if they could nail it shut with their minds. The door was never strong enough. On Sundays, we had half a day. The master called it mercy. We called it repair. We fixed tools and fixed bodies. Old Esther, the cook, rubbed salve into new wounds. She knew roots and leaves and the secret places where water tasted sweet and clean. When she told a story, even the air leaned in to listen. I learned early how to be useful. If a wheel cracked, I found a way to bind it. If a hinge squealed, I made it quiet. If a handle broke, I carved another from cypress. Boys got quick hands, Jenkins said once, not kindly. Quick hands made a slave live longer. Just long enough to learn that usefulness and safety are not the same thing. The big house watched us from a rise, white paint bright as a tooth. Inside were clocks, rugs, a piano no one touched, and books that smelled like rain. We kept our distance, but the house breathed us in every day. Our labor, our fear, our patience, and exhaled orders. Sometimes I looked at the river that marked one edge of the property. The water slid past like a secret. Boats came and went. Men counted bolts of cloth, salt and iron. They counted us too, quietly with their eyes. The river had two kinds of voices, one that laughed in the sunlight, and one that whispered after dark, promising roads no one could see. I did not yet know that words could open doors the way keys do. I did not yet know the price of wanting to read the Bible my mother had only heard in pieces. I only knew this. Something inside me stayed awake when the rest of me slept. It watched, it waited. It counted different things. Moments of kindness, flashes of weakness, paths through cane and cypress that no one else noticed. The master believed fear made us simple. He was wrong. Fear made us careful. Careful made us clever. Clever made us dangerous to anyone who thought we were only hands and backs and silence. 1840 Mississippi. One plantation, one boy named Caleb. A reckoning begins. Would you risk learning the truth if the price was the whip? It started with a stick and a floor of sawdust in the tool shed. I dragged the stick slow, a straight line, then a little cross. I didn't know the name of it, only that the shape felt like a door I might open if I found the right handle. That's an A, a voice said behind me. I spun so fast the stick snapped. In the doorway stood Eleanor Thornhill in a pale dress, hair tucked like a thought she didn't want anyone to see. She was 14, maybe 15, old enough to know rules, young enough to test them. You won't tell, I said. Not a question. Prayer. She stepped inside, closed the door, and looked at the shape I had scratched. Everyone should know how to read, she whispered. It's not fair that you can't. Fair wasn't a word that lived on plantations. But she said it like she'd fed it and kept it warm, so it followed her. The next day she came back with a tiny book, a child's primer wrapped in her shawl. She put it under a loose board by the workbench. Only when I'm here, she said. Only quick. We started with letters. A looked like a ladder, B like a belly, C like a mouth ready to bite. I traced them with a nail on scraps of wood. The shed smelled of oil and iron. Outside, Jenkins's whistle cut the air like a knife. Inside, a candle shook while Eleanor whispered sounds. Ba-ah-ti-bat. The first word I read was not God or love. It was stop. She smiled. That one matters too. We met when we could. 10 minutes stolen from a day that stole everything else. Sometimes the governess called for her, and Eleanor would hide the book under her skirt and leave without a word. Sometimes a houseboy passed the open door and I had to cough and pretend to be fixing a hinge. Each lesson raised the stakes. First words, then lines. I learned the names of tools I already knew by hand. Then she risked bigger things. Pages torn from old newspapers Master tossed aside. There was a word that kept appearing in bold, abolition. She said it slow. I said it after her. The way a man tries a key in a lock he can't see. 2 months in, the world tilted. I could read labels on crates by the river. Salt, molasses. Nails. I could read the master's name on the ledger when I carried it from the office to the parlor. Richard Thornhill. Each letter like a tooth in a jaw that had bitten us for years. Once, in the orchard, she handed me a page with a story from up north. A man who ran. A law that wanted him dragged back. I read it slow. Heat crawled up my neck. Words travel farther than feet, I said. Exactly, she whispered. And they don't get tired. But words make noise even when you speak them soft. Noise draws eyes. The risk grew with every vowel. I started hiding letters in my head the way we hid food under floorboards. At night I traced words on my leg beneath the blanket, freedom. So faint no one could see, but clear enough my skin would remember. We had one close call that almost ended everything. Eleanor had left a primer page under the bench. Jenkins walked in to ask why a plow blade wasn't back yet. My mouth filled with cotton. He stepped closer, boots scraping, eyes mean and bored. I angled my body between him and the board and held my breath until my ribs hurt. He spat on the floor, cursed the lazy hands, and left. I could feel Eleanor's fear from across the yard like smoke. After that, we moved. Sometimes the orchard, sometimes the far fence at dusk. We stuck to tiny bites, 3 lines, 4 lines, no more. But even tiny bites of fire can burn a house down. I knew it. She knew it. On a Sunday half-day, she brought me a book with thin pages and a cracked spine. It's the Bible, she said. You can choose a verse. I chose Exodus, finger shaking on the line, let my people go. The words were simple. The meaning was heavy. I said them in my throat like they were mine to carry. That night the quarters hummed the way they do before a storm. I watched the big house glowing on the hill, windows like eyes. I thought about letters, how they looked like gates and hooks and bridges, how a man could cross a river without wetting his feet if he knew how to read it. Learning did not make me safe. It made me clear. Clear made me brave. Brave made me visible in a place that punishes anything it can see. 1840 Mississippi. One girl's kindness. One forbidden lesson. The fuse is lit. If one page could cost your life, would you still turn it? The day it broke, heat lay over Thornhill like a wet blanket. I was fixing a gate near the big house when voices spilled from the study window. Sharp, bright, dangerous. It was only letters, Eleanor said, voice trembling but brave. Everyone should obey, Master Thornhill snapped. His fist hit wood. The desk shook. My ribs did too. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. Through the open shutter I saw her, cheeks flushed, eyes wet. And him, red with drink and pride. His hand gripped the Bible like a weapon. Who else? He demanded. What else did you give him? Words? Ideas? No one, she whispered. Just reading, just Exodus, his palm flashed. The sound cracked the room. She swayed, shock all over her face. Our eyes met for a breath, a whole life. Then I ran. I didn't make it to the rows. Dogs and men came like a storm, iron in their hands and hate in their mouths. The Tully brothers laughed when they threw me down. The dirt tasted like rust. I saw the sky in pieces between boots. They dragged me to the yard post at sundown so everyone would see. The bell rang once. Heads turned, then dropped. Mothers pulled children close. Men held their breath the way you hold a door. Master stood on the porch with a glass. Property forgot its place, he said. Property will learn. The first strike burned. The second cut. By 10, my mind tried to leave. By 20, the world narrowed to a white rope of pain. I counted without meaning to. One more, because counting was how I kept from drowning. I don't know the number they reached. I remember the silence after. Like the whole plantation had exhaled and had nothing left. Chain him in the shed, the master said. No water. If he lives, we'll see. If he dies, the swamp can have him. They dragged me across the yard. The door slammed. Iron kissed my wrists and ankles. Night came slow, heavy, full of flies and fever. I lay there and listened to my breath scratch the dark. At some point, the latch whispered. A shape slid in, small and sure. Caleb? Old Esther's voice. Smoke and honey, I tried to speak. It came out as gravel. She touched my forehead and clucked her tongue. Hot as a skillet. She held a tin cup to my lips. Water lit up every place inside me that had gone dim. I coughed. She waited. Listen, she said, eyes hard and soft at once. They mean to put you in the ground at first light. A hole by the swamp. No prayer, no marker. Just dirt. I know, I rasped. She drew something from her dress, a little glass vial, brown and secret. The liquid inside moved slow. This ain't mercy, she said. It's a door. Slows your heart, slows your breath. To them you'll look gone. If you strong, you wake. If you wake, you dig. Why? The word scraped my throat. Why risk everything for me? Her face did not move, but something old passed through her eyes. Had a boy once. Could write his name. They beat the letters out of him till the light left. Been waiting a long time to see this place choke on its own fear. She put the vial in my hand and wrapped my fingers with both of hers. Hear me clean. If you choose this, you ain't Caleb no more. You a story. You a shadow in the trees. You use their fear like a rope. You pull, but what if I don't wake? Then you cross like any man. But if you do, you come back different. And you make 'em remember. Bootsteps thudded past the shed. Laughter, a snatch of a hymn, the flint of a pipe. Time was short. Pain had become a room I lived in. I looked at the door. I looked at the chains. I looked at the little bottle that could turn me into a rumor. Do it, I said. She nodded once like a judge. She tipped the glass to my lips. Bitter ran across my tongue, down my throat, into my bones. The dark changed shape. Sounds stretched thin. My pulse slowed to a soft tapping I could count with my thumb. Esther pressed her palm to my chest and closed her eyes. They fear ghosts, child, she whispered. Be what they fear, but don't lose the man inside it. The latch kissed wood again. She was gone, the shed breathed with me. Then it didn't, then it did, barely like a moth under glass. My thoughts drifted to the swamp, to cypress knees, to roots holding up the world. If the earth took me, it would be the same earth that grew the cotton and the cane and the lies. I felt the edges of myself blur. Somewhere far away, a rooster lifted the night with one clean note. Dawn, I thought. Time to die. And if I could not stay dead, time to rise. 1840 Mississippi. One secret exposed. 1 yard of pain. One vial, one chance. If the only door to freedom made the world bury you, would you step through it? The world came back as a whisper. Boots on dirt, murmurs. A lid of sky the color of milk. Someone held a mirror to my lips. Someone else said, cold. Fingers pressed my wrist, my throat. He's gone, the overseer decided, like he was counting a bale. I heard it all from far away, like sound moving through water. Esther's mixture had slowed me to almost nothing. My lungs made the softest thread. My heart ticked like a weak clock. They wrapped me in a stained sheet and carried me past the quarters. No one looked up. Looking gets you punished. I watched through a slit in cloth. Cabin, smoke, children silent as stones. I wanted to tell them I was still here. The words wouldn't cross my lips. The hole waited at the cypress line, too shallow for a man worth money, deep enough for a man they called a lesson. The soil was wet. The shovel scraped roots. The swamp churred and clicked, alive and curious. Say something, one of the Tully brothers joked. A prayer. Laughter. No prayer. They lowered me in. The world got smaller. Faces became shapes. The sky shrank to a ragged frame. Cover him, the overseer said. The first slap of dirt hit my chest like a drum, then my face. Grit in my teeth, my eyes, my nose. The sound of shovels grew dull as the earth thickened over me. I felt the weight settle. I listened to my own breath fade, a moth beating at glass. If fear is a room, that grave was the whole house. I lay very still and counted, one slow beat, then another. The mixture dragged me towards sleep. Esther's words knocked on the door of my skull. If you wake, you dig. Time broke. It might have been minutes. It might have been a year. And then the medicine loosened its hold. My chest begged for air. Pain exploded awake. I opened my mouth and swallowed mud. I thrashed. The sheet tore under my knees. My wrists screamed where iron had chewed them. My back lit up with new fire as the dirt ground into every lash. I pushed up and felt the soil push back. It wanted me. It pressed like hands. Dig, I told myself. Dig. Fingers became claws. Nails tore. Shoved and twisted and rocked my shoulders until the soil above me crumbled an inch. More. Again. My head butted against roots, slick and tough as rope. Then something changed. The earth gave way all at once and my hand punched through into emptiness. Cold air touched my skin like a blessing. I widened the hole with my elbows, coughing mud, sucking damp breath. Not open air, a pocket, a space. My face slid into it and I gulped like a landed fish. The dark smelled of old wood and wet leaves. I pushed my shoulders through, then my hips, and dropped onto flooring? No, planks laid in a line, half-rotted, held by timbers. Tunnel. Esther had told the truth. Some old escapeway, caved in at the mouth, but still running under the edge of the swamp. I lay on my side and shook until the shaking passed. The tunnel was barely high enough to crawl. Water soaked my shirt. Things moved in it that I could not see. I did not care. Forward was forward. I began to crawl. Elbows, knees, drag, breathe. Elbows, knees, drag, breathe. The chains on my ankles clinked like teeth in the dark. Once something brushed my palm and I jerked back, heart slamming. I kept going. Time lost its shape again. Pain became a steady river. I followed it. Far ahead, a dot of light took hold. Faint at first, then a little stronger, like a match trying to live in the wind. I scraped my way to it and found a mesh of roots and vines. Behind them, night waited, cool, wet, huge. I tore at the tangle until my fingers bled fresh. The opening widened enough for a head, then a shoulder, then a whole man who refused to stay buried. I spilled out into the swamp, half born from the earth. Air hit me like a slap and a kiss. I lay on my back and stared at the sky. The moon was a broken coin between branches. Cypress knees rose like the bones of giants. Something slid in the water a hand's length from my face. I let it slide. Breath came ragged. Then slower, then mine. I rolled to a knee. The ground was soft and smelled of rot and life, both at once. A frog shouted. In the distance, the plantation rang with its usual night noises. Someone's cough, a door, a horse. I touched my chest. The heart inside it was small but stubborn. I touched the mud on my face. Death had painted me and then changed its mind. Caleb the slave met the grave at dawn. Something else rose at dusk. 1840 Mississippi. One grave filled. One tunnel found. One man reborn in mud and moonlight. If the earth let you climb back out, who would you be when you stood up? I walked until the trees blurred and the ground tipped. The swamp smelled like old breath, sweet, sour, alive. My back burned. My wrists leaked where iron had chewed them. Every step said stop. Something deeper said go. The cabin rose out of the reeds like it had grown there. Gray boards, a crooked chimney, bottles tied with string along the eaves. When I took another step, the door opened by itself. "Come in, grave walker," a voice said. She was small and old and steady, skin dark as wet bark, hair white as ash. Her eyes didn't blink much. They looked straight through the mud and blood and saw the part of me that had crawled out of the ground. "Sit," she said, as if there were no other choice. I sat. The room swam. Smoke curled from a clay bowl. Herbs hung from rafters. A drum leaned in a corner. She pressed a wet cloth to my back. Fire ran where the cloth touched, then cooled to a heavy calm. "You the one they buried wrong," she said. "Name?" "Caleb," I whispered. She fed me sips from a gourd, bitter first, then sweet, then sleep. I drifted and came back, drifted and came back. Time moved like water, slow and sure. She cleaned my wounds. She broke the ankle chains with tools I didn't ask about. She ground leaves with a stone and sang words I didn't know. When fever climbed, she beat it down with steam and a prayer that sounded older than the river. On the third day, she put a wooden bowl in my hands. "Eat," she said. "Corn, fish, greens. Enough to hold your spirit in place." "Why help me?" I asked. She shrugged one shoulder. "Because I can. Because you will use what I give. Because this land remembers." I slept without dreams and woke with them. Faces I knew. Faces I hated. A mask with hollow eyes floating in the dark like a moon. When I told her, she nodded. "You close to the door between," she said. "Death still got a finger on your shirt. That can pull a man or push him, depending which way he leans." "I'm leaning toward fire," I said. She watched me for a long beat. "Fire warms. Fire burns. You ready for both?" I thought of the post, the lash, the dirt in my mouth. "Yes." She went to a small chest and lifted a wrapped bundle. Cloth came away from wood. The thing inside was a face, carved smooth, dark, simple. Eye holes deep, mouth set like it knew a secret. Lines cut across the brow like little rivers. "This mask crossed water before you were born," she said, "carried by hands that would not bow. It sits between worlds. Put it on and the guilty won't just see you. They'll see what they fear most." I reached, then stopped. "What's the price?" "The same as everything," she said. "If you wear it too long, it wears you. If you feed it too much hate, it will eat your name. You'll forget your face and answer to the one with no eyes." She set the mask in my lap anyway. It was heavier than it looked. Warm from her hands. My fingers traced the edge. It felt like the rim of a well. "Why not send me north?" I asked. "Why not heal me and push me to freedom?" "Because north don't fix south by itself," she said. "Because fear moves faster than feet. Because you already died once and men who die don't run. They haunt." She taught me the swamp after that. How to step where roots hold. How to move without a sound. How to breathe with the trees so your chest doesn't shake the leaves. She showed me plants that make smoke thicken and plants that make a man's hands shake. She showed me dust that catches light like sparks and powder that glows dull red when a flame kisses it. "Their minds will finish what you start," she said. "You give them a whisper, they'll build a scream." At dusk, we stood at the door. The water lay black and flat. Fireflies blinked like tiny eyes. I lifted the mask to my face and paused. My reflection looked back at me in the polished wood, me and not me. "Say your name," she ordered. "Caleb." "Say it again." "Caleb." She nodded. "Keep it close. When the mask tries to take it, bite down." I slid the mask on. The world changed. Shadows deepened. Sounds sharpened. Frogs, wind. The distant creak of a wheel at Thornhill. Through the mask, it all felt colder and clearer, like I was standing inside the night, not under it. "Who will you visit first?" she asked. "Jenkins," I said. The hand with the whip. The counting voice. The grin. "Then go," she said. "Walk soft. Speak true. Be a story they can't stop telling." I stepped into the trees. The swamp swallowed me without a ripple. The mask breathed slow against my skin. My name beat steady in my mouth. The dead had no voice on Thornhill. I would give them one. 1840 Mississippi. One healer's hut. One spirit mask. One lesson in fear. If justice asked you to wear a mask that could steal your face, would you still put it on? I watched him 3 nights from the palmettos by his window. Same pattern each time. Stew from the cookhouse, 2 tin cups of whiskey, a third for courage he didn't have. Boots off with a grunt, rifle laid by the bed, whip hung like a trophy over his headboard. Then the snore, heavy, careless. certain the night belonged to him. On the fourth night, I set the table for fear. I rubbed Tantalavo's resin along the sill so the candle flame would gutter and crawl when a draft moved. I dusted the floorboard seam with a pinch of red clay that would bloom like blood in lamplight. I tied a black thread from the door latch to the bedpost, so when he stirred, the latch would lift by itself and whisper, "Someone came in." Then I waited until the moon climbed behind thin cloud and turned the world the color of bone. I slipped through the door, mask on, cloak drawn. In the dim, his face looked softer than I remembered, a man and not a monster. Then my back stung at the thought, and the softness burned away. I started with a sound. Low, hollow, the voice Tante taught me to pull from my ribs. Not a word. A morning. It filled the corners and came back to me like it had walked a long road. Jenkins shuddered awake, hand groping for the rifle. The black thread lifted the latch with a tiny click. His eyes tracked the door. "Who's there?" he said, voice already bending. I stepped into the candle's weak circle. The resin draft made the flame bow. The mask's hollow eyes caught the little light and gave nothing back. "Abel," I said, the name a stone dropped in a well. His mouth opened and closed. He swallowed. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, you're dead." I took one step forward. "Count with me." I raised my left hand, palm out, a slow metronome. 1, 2, 3. His breath hitched on 4. "You lost count around 90, didn't you?" He slid sideways along the mattress, knuckles white on the rifle stock. The barrel wavered between my chest and the wall. I didn't move. I let him think about distance and aim and how whiskey works on the hands after midnight. Who are you?" His voice cracked. I tilted the mask, let the candle pick out the map of scars on my throat, where the sheet had rubbed the grave dirt raw. "Property," I said softly. "Your word. Your habit. Your bedtime story." I turned my head and looked up at his prize. The whip. I took it down without hurry. The plaited leather felt like a length of winter in my palm. I snapped it once, not on him but on the bedpost inches from his ear. The crack split the room. Jenkins flinched so hard the rifle clattered to the floor and discharged into the rafters. Dust fell like gray rain. "Get away," he begged, voice small and young. "Please, Lord, did you call him when you raised your arm?" I asked. "Did you use his name between the numbers?" The red clay on the floor took the candle and glowed dull as fresh wound. Jenkins stared at it, lips moving without words. He made the sign of the cross in the wrong order. "Confession," I said. "Tomorrow at church, you will name what you did. Every lash. Every pleasure you took pretending it was duty." I leaned close until the mask's hollow eyes filled his sight. "If you don't, I will come back for the missing number." "The missing number?" he stammered. 91, I breathed. "The one you owe?" I stepped backward and let the dark take me. At the threshold, I raised the whip and laid it across the door jamb. Not a strike, a mark. A tally. Then I was outside, part of the trees again. The night cool against the heat beating under the mask. Morning carried him like a flood. Jenkins burst into the church with his shirt half-buttoned, eyes red, cheeks gray. He pushed the preacher aside and poured himself out. Names, acts, the little cruelties he'd polished to a shine. The room went still. Women covered their mouths. Men stared at their hands as if the sins might be written there too. By sundown, he was dismissed. By moonrise, the story had left Thornhill and crossed 3 properties. The overseer who laughed was seen weeping like a boy. He'd seen a ghost, they said. A slave the ground refused to keep. 2 days later, they found him at the edge of the cypress, hanging where no branch grew low enough to help him climb. Folks said whiskey did it. Folks said guilt. The wind through the trees sounded like a rope. I said nothing. I only listened to the way the quarters hummed that night. Fear, yes, but something else creeping in behind it. Something I had not felt since I was a boy with a gourd and a long row ahead. Hope moves quiet at first. The mask sat warm on my face. It had eaten one man's courage and fed a dozen hearts. I understood the lesson. I did not have to kill to make death walk through their sleep. I only had to hold up a mirror and let their sins do the counting. 1840 Mississippi. One mask raised. One confession rung. A legend takes its first breath. If the man who hurt you begged for mercy, would you grant it or make him speak first? Their dogs found everything, broken grass, a bent reed, fear. The Tully brothers walked behind those noses like kings. I knew their steps, their jokes, their spit. I knew the way they looked at a man and added iron to his future. So I started with the dogs. Tanta Lavo taught me a meat crumb mash. Harmless to life, mean to sight. I left it on a log where hounds sniffed first. They ate like always. 10 minutes later, the world blurred for them. Not blind, just wrong. Trees doubled. Tracks slipped sideways. Each bark came out puzzled. The brothers blamed the wind. They cursed the swamp. They didn't blame me because they believed I was dead. I let them keep believing it. Next, I gave them signs only guilt can read. At the fork by Widow Creek, I stacked twigs into a stickman shape, arms up like a warning. By the river bend, I tied little bundles, feather, bone, a shred of red cloth, high where no ladder could reach. On an oak trunk, I carved 4 words with a nail. Dead don't run. They laughed when they found the first 2. Ephraim's laugh was big and empty. Matthew's was thin. John didn't laugh. He kicked the bundle into the mud, then wiped his boot hard, like the mud bit him. On the 3rd day, I lit slow herbs in a hollow stump. The smoke crawled along the ground, low and sweet. If you breathed it, the edge of the world turned soft and old faces came to visit. Matthew found it first. He waved it away, then breathed deeper without meaning to. His eyes changed, wider, like a man seeing a far fire in a mirror. He turned in a slow circle. Hear that? He whispered. Hear what? John snapped. Singing, Matthew said. Close. He tilted his head like a dog, mouth open, tears coming without a reason. When he blinked, his lashes left black marks on his cheeks. I let the wind carry a chant from the palmettos. Soft, half a hymn, half the low moan of a wounded wheel. It wasn't loud, but it made the hair rise on the neck. Ephraim fired his pistol into the brush just to feel brave. The shot scared the dogs more than me. They curled their tails and tried to hide behind legs that had never shielded anyone. Night took the edges off courage. The brothers camped where 3 deer paths cross, the place their father taught them to sit and wait. I sat 20 paces beyond the circle of their lantern, mask on, breath slow, watching the light shiver. I started my walk around. Not close. Never close. A crunch here, a splash there. A moth brushed a lantern glass and the whole camp jerked like the world had shouted. I brushed the whistle reeds. They sang one thin human note, show yourself. John yelled into the trees. The pitch of his voice came back wrong. Higher, younger. I stepped where he could catch me in the corner of his eye. White mouth of the mask floating between cypress knees, then gone. He spun and tripped over his own bedroll. Ephraim hauled him up by the collar and slapped him once, the way bosses do when fear shows. His hand trembled after. Before dawn, I set my last trick, powder in a line that burns without flame, buried in 12 thumb-sized pouches around their camp. When Ephraim kicked the fire awake, the heat kissed the powder and the earth exhaled smoke rings, 12, small ghosts rising from nowhere and circling. Slow, that broke them, Ephraim. Went to his knees and said he was sorry to a god he had used like a fence. Matthew threw up behind a tree, then reached for the bottle and didn't stop reaching that way for weeks. John shot into the smoke and ran. I let him run. The swamp can judge. I don't have to. 2 days later, word spread. Ephraim Tully told Master Thornhill they were retiring. He used that fine word with his hat in his hands and sweated his back. Matthew drank himself into stillness on a porch 3 counties over, eyes fixed on a spot no one else could see. John, no one knew. Some said Texas, some said the river. Some swore they heard a single shot out near the Tamarack, and then nothing. I didn't stand over any grave. I didn't need to. Sometimes victory is not a body. It's a silence where a voice used to be. That night, the quarters talked softer and laughed longer. Babies slept. Men stretched their backs like a weight had moved. I walked the edge of the fields and listened to the soil breathe. I felt the mask warm against my skin like a coal that remembers fire. If you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe now so these stories keep living. 1840 Mississippi, 3 hunters, 1 swamp. The hounds lost their way and so did their masters. If the men who hunted you became the ones hunted by fear, would you finish them or let the legend do the work? After the Tullys broke, the nights changed. The air felt lighter, like a taut rope had loosened a notch. Still fear stayed. Fear always stays, but it shared the room now with something it hated. Hope. I learned how to move with the drum of the quarters. Babies slept in waves. Fires cracked at certain hours. Men coughed when whiskey came cheap. Women hummed when the day had not taken all their strength. I kept to the edges and went where the mask would help, not harm. Isaiah the carpenter saw me first. Proper this time, not a trick of smoke. He sat on his step, rubbing his hands with lard to soften the cracks. I stood under the china berry, halfway in shadow. "You a good spirit or the other kind?" he asked in a steady voice. "I am what they made," I said. "And what you need." He nodded like that answer fit a space he had saved for it. "Then hear me. The young ones want to run. The mothers want to hide. The old ones want to live long enough to watch cotton rot. We need a way that is not pure death. So I gave them ways. I started with quiet lessons, 3 letters. Nevermore, traced on a plank with a charred stick, B-O-W. Then I wiped it. And the student traced it again with a finger on their palm. The next night, a new hand wrote F-R-E-E in the dust between bedrolls. We spoke low. We watched the door. We folded the alphabet like a small blade and hid it in our sleeves. I walked the fence line and found the soft boards that could lift without a squeal. I dug shallow hollows near the creek and cached flints, jerky, 2 old knives, a rag to bind a foot. I tied thin cords in the cane as markers only a night walker would. Notice, 1 knot meaning turn, 2 knots danger, a knot, and a twist water close. I learned the overseer's new rounds and built false trails to pull him away when a woman labored, or a boy needed quiet to breathe. A dropped hat to the west, a boot track stamped by my own hand to the east, a scuff on the road made with a hoe blade. Jenkins had taught me the value of a mark. I gave marks back like medicine. Once I watched a girl named Ruth read her child's fever with the back of her hand, lips moving a prayer older than the hymn they taught in the white church. I leaned into the doorway and left a bottle of willow bark tea and a folded scrap. Boil, cool. 3 sips, then sleep. In the morning, the baby's breath came easy. Ruth stood at the door and whispered into the dark, "Thank you, whoever you are." The mask did not answer. It did not need to. Not everyone welcomed a ghost. The quarters preacher, bought piety heavy on threats, warned folks not to entertain spirits. He said fear of masters was holy and fear of ghosts was sin. I stood outside his window while he practiced that speech and tapped the sill 1 time. Slow. He choked on his words and changed his sermon to God remembers the oppressed. Good. He could keep that one. I made a bargain with the bravest boys and the steadiest men. 3 taps on a cabin wall at midnight meant come outside and don't speak. We met at the woodpile and walked the ditch to the cane. I showed them the swamp's mouth and how to feed it a branch to see the current before you trust your foot. I taught them Tantalavo's trick with moss and mud to cover shine on a cheek. I put my palm on their backs and felt their breath climb up my arm. Fear does that. Courage does too. The first party I guided out was 5 souls. A couple with a child, a widower with hands like rope, and a girl who could carry a sack of meal on her hip like a drum. We moved at cloud speed, slow and sure, stopping when owls spoke, stepping when frogs did. At the river I had already hung a cord across, thin as a vein, so by touch alone they could find the far bank. On the other side, a maroon camp breathed under magnolia, faces lifted, arms opened. No one cheered. They were too wise for noise, but they looked back at the water like a door had stayed open behind them. It had. Word, the kind that doesn't use lips, passed through the cabins. The ghost protects. The ghost teaches. The ghost points. Children left small gifts where I might pass. 2 berries on a leaf, a button, a smoothed nail. I left back better gifts, salve, flint, a bit of smoked fish wrapped in corn husk, a scrap with 3 letters and a promise of more. Thornhill felt the change and mistook it for laziness, which is what masters call any life not spent serving them. He cursed at dawn, drank by noon, and patrolled after midnight with a lantern that shook because his hand did. He could not fight what he could not name. He shot at shadows and hit nothing but his own sleep. In the quarters, we began to practice a new kind of quiet. Not dead quiet, living quiet, the kind soldiers use. The kind rivers use when they carve rock. If you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe now so more people hear what fear tried to erase. 1840 Mississippi. Quarters whisper. One ghost, many eyes. Courage learns to walk. If a mask gave your people hope in the dark, would you keep wearing it, even if it started to change your face? Daylight made him angry. Night made him helpless. I saw it first in the ledgers he carried like a Bible. He'd sit on the porch steps with his glass, thumbing pages, lips moving as if the numbers might change if he begged them. Fewer bales, more losses. Tools broken and not returned. Slack hands, he muttered. But it wasn't slack. It was will. Cotton browned on the stalk when storms came, and no one hurried to save it. Gins clattered one day and stood quiet the next. The smith let a hinge squeal for a week, and no one scolded him because no one wanted to be near the big house anymore. Merchants sent notes, account past due. The sheriff brought one and tipped his hat too low, like even his eyes wanted to hide. In the quarters, time learned a different shape. We rose when the bell rang, yes, but our steps were ours. A woman took an extra minute to plait her child's hair. A boy kept his back straight when a voice told him to bend. Small rebellions stacked like kindling. Thornhill felt the heat and called it laziness. He fired the new overseer after a single week because the man refused to walk the rows after sundown. No one else would take the job. Even poor whites who'd do anything for coin found excuses to be somewhere else. He started his own patrols then. Boots, shotgun, and a brass lantern that shook in his hand. He prowled the lane, the gin yard, the slave street, muttering names like curses. Sometimes he stopped and stared into trees as if they stared back. The light made a trembling circle. Outside it, I stood still and let him imagine. Fear is loud in quiet places. It will fill silence with teeth. His wife took to bed with a nervous fever. I never saw her window open again. The doctor came twice, left leeches once, and sent God the bill for the rest. The daughters left by carriage at dawn, trunks piled high. Eleanor looking back only once when the wheels hit the gate rut. I couldn't see her face, but I saw her hand lift half an inch as if to say forgive me to the air. The carriage rolled east toward Charleston. The house looked bigger when the road swallowed them. The preacher tried to help. He came with a Bible and a bottle and sprinkled both around the yard. He said, "You must not feed superstition," in a voice that shook, then crossed himself when a whip crack echoed from the old gin with no one there to swing it. He left faster than he came. Thornhill set traps like a boy, bells on thread across walkways, salt lines at doors, a circle of ash around the whipping post. A string of little blue bottles hung in a pine to trap bad spirits. I let the bells ring alone in wind, stepped over salt and wrote 3 words in ash where he'd be sure to see them. Count your sins. No footprints. No handprints. Just the ash. If you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe now so more folks hear what fear tried to erase. He stopped sleeping. The lantern grew a second shadow below his eyes. Sometimes he wandered to the swamp edge and stared at the cypress line like the trees were lining up to judge him. Twice he ordered men to dig near the place they'd buried me, as if proof on a shovel could fix a nightmare. They hit roots in water in fear. He told them to fill it back and cursed at the mud when it didn't obey. He drank earlier each day. The glass clinked at noon, then morning. His words slurred into names. Jenkins, Tully, Isaiah, like a child counting ghosts in the dark. He raised the shotgun at nothing and pulled the trigger just to hear power. The sound made babies cry and dogs run. The echo came back empty. I left a single feather on his porch rail and watched him stare at it for an hour without moving. I laid a coil of old chain where he'd step when he opened the study door. He kicked it once hard and then sagged to his knees and put his face in his hands. He said my name the way a man says mercy. I did not answer, not yet. The old cotton gin at the far end of the property sat like a dry tongue. Boards gray, roof split, gears asleep. They'd built a new one closer to the press, so this one turned into a barn for spare parts and broken promises. In July heat, wood thinks about fire. In drought, it dreams of it. Every night, Thornhill circled that building, lantern high, as if he knew the place he feared was the place that would finally speak. I walked inside at noon one day and ran my hand along the posts. Dust came away black. Birds had nested where belts once sang. In the corner lay a crate of oil rags and a sack of old seed that smelled like last harvest's sweat. Fire knows friends when it finds them. I left without a sound and stood beneath the chinaberry tree, where the yard could not see me. Thornhill stumbled out of the big house, lantern unlit in the sun, gun on his shoulder like a lie. He looked left, then right, as if choosing a road. He chose the one toward the old gin. The night had been his kingdom. Now it was a judge. I followed at a distance, counting. Not lashes, not days. Just steps to the place where everything that rots learns to burn. 1840 Mississippi. One master unraveling. One house emptied. One dry gin waiting. When your enemy is already destroying himself, do you strike or let the fall finish him? The gin sat at the far edge like a dead tooth. Boards gray, roof split, belt stiff as bone. Inside, the air smelled of seed dust and old oil, the kind that keeps a small spark alive. I walked the posts and marked the places where fire would run like a fox, low, hidden, fast. From Tantelavo's pouch, I took the thin matchsticks and the oil-soaked scraps I'd saved. Not a blaze, never a roar at first. Fear needs time to bloom. I tucked the rags behind a fallen pulley, under a stair, along a seam where light would not touch yet. A thin dribble of lamp oil linked them like a string. Night came slow and hot, a blanket you could not push away. Across the yard, Thornhill's lantern bobbed. He was on patrol again, speaking to the dark like it would answer. I slipped out the back, circled wide, and waited with the mask cool on my face. When the crickets started a steady choir, I struck the first match. One small tongue of light. It kissed the nearest rag, and moved along the oil line in a quiet hurry. Inside the gin, tiny fires woke in corners like eyes opening. Here, then there, nothing to see from the yard yet. Only the faintest glow between boards. Richard Thornhill, I said into the night. He spun, shotgun up, lantern swinging wild. Who calls? His voice cracked. Show yourself. The mask stepped from the trees and held its ground. You buried me, I said. The swamp kept me. I counted my breaths under your dirt. I learned patience. You're dead, he whispered, the word breaking in half. He fired. The shot tore bark from a pine 2 steps to my right. The echo ran off and left us with our breathing. You can't kill what you already killed, I said, and took one slow step closer. Behind him, the gin learned to speak. A low crack, a cough of light through a slat. He smelled it next, the sharp note of heat biting old oil. He turned, saw the orange crawl along a beam and shouted a sound with no words. He stumbled forward, lantern high. Water, buckets! But the yard was far and the men were wary. And the fire, small a moment ago, found dry stair treads and climbed like it had knees. Don't, I said. But he didn't hear me, or he heard and chose pride. He rushed the open door and vanished into heat. For a breath, I stood frozen. This was not the line I meant to cross. I wanted ruin, not a body. I wanted a lesson, not an end. But choices have gravity, and his pulled him in. The flames took the lower floor and began to lick the roof seams. A window blew with a hot sigh. Sparks leapt to the night like fireflies that had forgotten gentleness. The gin moaned. A building makes a human sound when it breaks. Men ran at last with buckets forming a crooked chain. A woman cried somewhere past the quarters. A baby answered. I moved along the shadow edge and watched the doorway. Smoke poured out thick and dark, then pale, then dark again. No man came. In the crackle, I heard other things. The whip's old song, the overseer's count, the creak of carts hauling bales paid for with our backs. Fire can be a thief or a judge. Tonight it judged. The roof went in with a long groan and a rush of sparks that turned the air to stars. The men with buckets fell back, faces hot, shirts to their mouths. Someone shouted the master's name like a prayer. No answer came but the burning. I stepped away, feet sure on paths I knew by heart. The mask felt heavier than any chain I had worn. At the swamp edge, I looked back once. The gin glowed like a fallen sun. Shadows moved and stilled. The night swallowed the roar, one mouthful at a time. Back in the trees, I took off the mask and held it in both hands. My palms shook. I thought of Tantelavo's warning. Wear it too long and it will wear you. I had not meant to trade my anger for a man's life. But anger spends what it has if you let it. If you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe now so these stories keep breathing. By morning, folks would call it accident or judgment or the devil's work. The quarters would share looks that said more than talk. The county would add a new line to the legend. The master who walked into his own fire. I washed my hands in river water that smelled like iron and lilies. The red ran off, then the black. My reflection shook. The mask's hollow eyes looked back from the surface even though it lay on the bank. I whispered my name to keep it close. Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. The wind carried ash into the cypress. The cypress did not care. The river moved like it always does, past the place where a house once ruled and a djinn once sang. The night learned my silence. The day would learn the story. 1840 Mississippi. One old djinn, one mask in the dark. Fire chose the ending. If justice arrived as fire and your enemy ran toward it, would you pull him back or let the flames tell the truth? The morning after the fire, smoke lay over the fields like a second sky. Men poked the ash with poles and said the word accident, the way a child says monster, hoping the name will make it smaller. By noon, the story had run farther than any horse. They called me many things. The grave walker, the mask in the trees, the slave the swamp wouldn't keep. I said nothing. I let the names work. Merchants at the river asked why wagons were late. Ghost, a driver muttered, eyes on his boots. A clerk laughed, then crossed himself when a bottle on the shelf rattled by itself. Just a loose board underfoot, but guilt hears more than wood. In town, the sheriff folded a handbill about runaway slaves and stared at the window like it might grow a face. Neighboring planters came to look at the ruins. They stood with hats in hand and talked in tight voices about discipline and order. When the wind shifted and pushed warm ash across their boots, they stepped back together, like a single man with 4 sets of legs. It's hysteria, one said. It's northern agitators, said another. It's the devil, said a third lower. No one said the word justice. At night, patrols thickened. 20 men with lanterns and guns walked the lanes like they owned the dark. I let them. The dark does not sign deeds. It rents to whoever pays attention. I moved in the places they did not, behind smokehouses, under porches, along the ditch where frogs sang like small drums. When a patrol stopped at a cabin to demand names, a slow ring of smoke lifted from the yard, round and even, rising from no fire at all. Men backed up into each other and cursed as if the smoke had hands. A preacher from the next county tried to break the spell. He held a meeting and shouted that ghosts were lies. He beat the pulpit until his palm turned pink. The lamp behind him flickered once, then twice, then died. He stood in the dark, mouth open, and a woman in the back row whispered, "Let there be light," and struck a match. The room laughed softly and did not stop for a long time. Not all my work was tricks. Some of it was simply showing up where I had not been seen before, and letting the quiet do the speaking. I stood in a doorway while a man fed his old mother, and watched him lift the spoon with care that would shame any master. I stood at a well rope and pulled water for a tired girl with a baby on her hip. She did not look up. She said, "Thank you, Spirit," like it was an everyday word. Runaways rose in numbers the patrol books had never seen. Some I led. Some led themselves using the markers I taught. 2 knots, the twist, the low branch broken clean. A few were caught and brought back with ropes around their wrists and bruises on their faces. I stood outside the shed where they were held and counted, low and even, until the guard walked away to find company and never came back. Rumors grew teeth. Folks swore they saw a mask standing at the foot of a master's bed, naming sins one by one. Sins only the man himself could know. They said dogs howled at a spot in the yard where no one stood. That a whip cracked by itself and then fell to the ground like a snake too tired to strike. They said the river sometimes spoke the word Caleb when wind pushed it just right against the reeds. If you're still watching, you care about buried history. Subscribe now so more people hear what fear tried to silence. The county tried to fight a story with steel. They added locks. I added keys of another kind, routes, signs, hands. They sent riders. I sent rumors that moved faster. They called for calm. I called for memory. I did not need to win every hour. I only needed to keep the doubt alive. What if the dead do come back? What if the ones we hurt can count? That doubt worked like water on stone. It found every crack. It widened the weak places. Overseers quit before they even started. Trader took sick at the gate and could not cross the yard. A patrol captain sat on his porch with a gun across his knees and fell asleep sitting up. Because sleep comes for everyone, even the armed. In the quarters, nights got longer in a good way. We talked, we planned. We taught more letters. STAY for the ones who must care for those who cannot run. GO for the ones whose feet were ready. We shared bread. We shared watch. We shared the strange, bright truth that for once, fear weighed more on their side of the fence than on ours. I kept my visits short and my name close. The mask cooled and warmed, like a heart that did not live in a chest. Sometimes I took it off and held it, and the night still looked through 2 empty eyes. The legend did not belong to me anymore. It belonged to every whisper that moved between cabins and every shiver that moved through a master's hand. It belonged to the soft steps by the river and the heavy steps on the porch. It walked without me and with me both. 1840 Mississippi. One fire, one name and smoke. A legend walks past every gate. Do you think fear can change a system, or only people? The swamp remembers everything. Keeps sound the way a jar keeps light, sealed, waiting. On a gray morning after the fire, I stood at the water's edge and listened to what I had become. Wind moved the moss. Turtles slid from a log. Somewhere far off, a hammer tapped. Someone fixing something I had broken on purpose. I took the mask off and held it against my chest. Wood warm from my skin, edges smooth from my hands. In the hollow eyes, I could see the sky, thin and pale. In the hollow eyes, I could also see myself smaller than I liked. Tante lavo, I said into the trees. I hear you. Wear it too long and it will wear you. I had worn it long. It had worn me back. So I set it on a stump and stepped away. 10 paces, 20. I waited to feel the pull, that itch to pick it up and be the story, not the man. The pull came. That is what power does. It calls you by the name it gave you. I walked back anyway and lifted it once more. Slow, like I was picking up a child. Not today, I told it. Not always. I wrapped it in cloth and hid it where water whispers and roots hold. Place only a night walker could find. Then I spoke my name until the sound felt right in my mouth again. Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. What did the fire change? Masters still owned papers with our names. Chains still waited on nails. Men still rode with guns and claimed God rode with them. But something else lived now. Something harder to chain. Doubt had crept under doors that never opened. Stories had taken seats at tables that never set a place for us. A boy in the quarters could trace FREE on his thigh and know the shape by heart. A woman could hide a packet of journey food in a wall and sleep a little easier. I did not fix the world. I cracked it. Cracks let light in. Cracks let water through. Cracks become new paths when you press. Word of me traveled farther than my feet could go. In one county, folks said they saw a face with no eyes at the edge of a rice field. In another, a whip fell from a barn beam and no hand touched it. A jailer swore a key turned in his pocket by itself, and a door swung open on a quiet hinge. Were those me? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but the story did not care. The story worked without sleep. I walked less by houses and more by river. I helped who needed helping and left no mark but a steadier breath. I taught letters to hands that had only known tools. I learned the names of stars from men who had once tracked deer and now tracked freedom. I listened more than I spoke. When fear rose, I let the mask do its work. When hope rose, I let the mask rest. Years will pass. Fields will change. A road will cut where the gin once stood. Children will run on grass that once swallowed blood. They will hear different names for what happened here. Progress, tragedy, history. Let them also hear the truth people chose. Some chose the lash. Some chose the door. Some chose the whisper that grew into a shout. If you stand in this swamp on a fog night and think you see a man between cypress knees, maybe you do. Maybe it's only mist learning a new shape. Maybe it's a memory that refuses to lie down. Maybe it's a warning. The dead are not as quiet as you think, and the living are not as weak. I am not done. Not while any hand is owned. Not while any mouth is shut. But I am not only a mask. I am a man who would not stay buried. I am a voice that learned to count. I am the crack in a system that called itself unbreakable. If you meet me on the road, do not ask if I am a ghost. Ask if you are ready to remember. Because that is the true haunting. Memory that will not bend. 1840 Mississippi. One mask hidden. One name spoken. One story still walking. Do you think history remembers truth? Or only the voices loud enough to claim it? If you're still here, you care about buried history. Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and watch the next story. because every crack we make together lets in more light.